This presentation is called Overcoming Linguistic Features That Pose a Challenge to Elementary ELL Students, presented by Katie Schwiebert, Spring 2015, submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements of TS 720, Second Language Acquisition, part of the Master TESOL program at Emporia State University. The abstract. There is a long list of linguistic features that can cause confusion for children trying to acquire a new language successfully. This research paper will review these and other issues associated with specific difficult linguistic features, discussing tips and solutions for overcoming the challenges while still providing helpful advice for educators. Table of contents. Topic selection. Research questions for literature review, the literature review itself, challenging linguistic features, causes, overcoming the causes and linguistic features, research findings, application and conclusion, and ending with references. Topic selection. The relationship between how children learn their first language, L1, and how they learn their second language, L2, in subsequent languages has concerned language acquisition, SLA research, ever since it became an independent discipline. This relationship between the two languages is crucial because it defines the very nature of second language acquisition. The main question for many researchers has been whether the stages and processes through which L2 learners develop are the same as those for L1 children. SLA researchers were impressed by the overall idea of sequence. The discovery of a common acquisition sequence for L2 learners is surely one of the most exciting and significant outcomes of the last decade of second language research. Experiments indeed showed that L2 learners acquired things in a sequence resembling L1 acquisition, however, still faced some difficult linguistic challenges along the way. A young student who speaks and writes Spanish flawlessly as their L1 will struggle with English as their L2, primarily because of the linguistic features associated with the English language. One important research objective of this essay will be to investigate the linguistic characteristics of L2 speech and writing associated with different developmental stages or different proficiency levels. This additional research will provide helpful tools for educators in the process of building the foundation for practice in language assessment and teaching. The research questions of the literature review. This literature review will address the following questions. Question 1. What L2 linguistic features pose a challenge to ELL students who speak Spanish as their L1 at the elementary age level? Question 2. What causes these features to pose challenges? Question 3. How can we as educators assist them to overcome the challenge? The literature review. It is the goal of this literature review to understand which linguistic features elementary Spanish speakers will have the most difficulty with while acquiring English. This literature review will help determine and explain why linguistic features, specifically those of phonology, phonetics, morphology, syntax, semantics, sociolinguistics, and pragmatics, pose the most challenges to Spanish-speaking ELL students trying to acquire English as their L2. After determining the significant linguistic challenges are addressed, the literature review will help discuss solutions for overcoming the struggles. Various methods and strategies that need to be implemented in the classroom will be also discussed in order to assist the teacher with the learning processes of their students. This literature review will not only focus on the linguistic difficulties with L2 speaking, but will also include a brief discussion about the linguistic challenges associated with L2 writing. This will all be accomplished by reviewing the current research on the issues and developing new strategies in order to meet the needs of a variety of different learning styles. Question 1 that I'm addressing is the challenging linguistic features. According to the National Education Association, NEA, English language learners are the fastest growing segment of the public school population. Over the past 15 years, the number of ELL students has nearly doubled to about 5 million. By the end of 2015, ELL enrollment in the U.S. schools will reach 10 million. And by 2025, nearly 1 out of 4 public school students will be an English language learner. With this in mind, it is important to realize that there is a long list of linguistic considerations that coincides with the English language learners whose native language is Spanish. There are many common errors in pronunciation, grammar, among other things in English made by such learners due to significant differences between their native language and English. Following are the salient phonological and grammatical differences and similarities between Spanish and English based on Coe 1987. Number 1. Spanish and English consonant systems share many similarities, but vowel systems and sentence stress show considerable differences. Spanish has 5 pure vowels. Typically, 2 English vowels share the phonetic space, occupied by 1 Spanish vowel. For example, English E in eat and I in it share the same high front articulation space with Spanish I as in idu. Thus, one-to-one correspondence between Spanish and English vowels are impossible. 3. Certain vowels in Spanish do not exist. 4. Spanish initial voiceless stops, PTK, are not aspirated as in English, so they sound like the voice stops, BVG, to English ears. Number 5. Word final voice stops are rare in Spanish. Learners tend to use T for D, P for B, and K for G in word final position. Number 6. Z does not exist in Spanish, so learners say pence for both pence and pens. Number 7. Spanish has 1 sound, a labial consonant, in the area of B and B, causing confusion in the minimal pair vowels. Number 8. English has more consonant clusters. A simple word for native English speakers, like breakfast, is tough for Spaniards, will often pronounce it breakfast and omit the F and the final T because they are attached to another consonant. Number 9. In Spanish, all syllables take about the same amount of time to pronounce. On the other hand, English stressed syllables are pronounced more slowly and distinctly. English is a stress-timed language. Spanish is a syllable-timed language. In English, we would put the beat on the consonant symbols in the sentence, "The Beatles were bigger than Elvis." A Spanish speaker might pronounce each syllable equally and might sound robotic to English speaker ears who would struggle to identify the key content. The Beatles were bigger than Elvis. Number 10. Grammatical similarities between Spanish and English abound. Singular and plural forms of nouns, definite and indefinite articles, regular and irregular verbs, past, present, future tenses, perfect and progressive verb forms. Number 11. Spanish has a much freer word order than English. In English, an adjectives come before a noun, black, cat, but the noun generally comes before the adjective in Spanish, cat, black. The other problem is that we talk about black cats in English, but gatos negros in Spanish. The adjective has a plural form, which it doesn't in English. Number 12. Spanish shows gender and number in adjectives and nouns. Number 13. Spanish does not use passive voice as much as English. And number 14. Spanish has an active subjunctive mood. Additional linguistic challenges that take place. In addition to the above challenges proposed by Coe, there are a few more additional linguistic problems elementary Spanish learners have when acquiring English. The relationship in English between pronunciation and orthography, sound and spelling, is a nightmare for Spanish speakers, because these two aspects are joined at the hip in their language. English orthography differs from the orthography of Spanish due to its use of grapheme to morpheme accordance and grapheme to phoneme accordance. Native speakers of English whose orthography is strictly phonetic may encounter difficulties when spelling in English due to this difference. Words sound as they are spelled and spelled like they are sound. This is undoubtedly not the case in English. Also, the Spanish language doesn't really have contracted forms the same way as English. This means they can't always hear them. I'll see you tonight. Yes, I see you tonight. Or they misuse them. Are you Juan? Yes, I'm. Additional linguistic challenges continue. Asking questions with auxiliary verbs is a minefield for Spanish speakers as well. They often omit them and just use them in affirmative form. You are happy? Sometimes they remember the auxiliary but put the main verb in the past tense to make sure they are understood. Did you went to the party? Question tags are also problematic due to the fact that there is a one-size-fits-all tag in Spanish. You are hungry, no? Unlike English, which is far more structurally complex. It should also be noted that subject personal pronouns, I, you, she, he, we, it, they, are often unnecessary in Spanish, as the form of the main verb identifies the subject. This is why you'll hear Spanish speakers saying things like, is Tom here? Yes, is here. Lastly, Spanish and English have cognates, which are similar words in two languages such as intelligent and intelligente, and derive from Latin. Just as English speakers often change English suffixes to Spanish ones to form words, apparently, aparentemente. Spanish speakers often try to use a Spanish word only to find that it has a very different meaning in English, causing a lot of linguistic confusion. Research question number 2. What causes the linguistic complications? At younger and younger ages, children are negotiating difficult language transitions between their home language use and the language use of their educational setting, requiring an adaptation to 2 or more diverse sets of grammatical rules, values, expectations, and appropriate accent. The sequence of acquisition of morphologic constructions can vary between languages depending on the linguistic complexity of the structure in that language. One example of this would be the notion that Spanish-speaking children acquire reflexive pronouns early, but these develop later in English-speaking children. In addition to this difference in grammatical features between English and Spanish, can also influence the bilingual Spanish child's use of morphology and syntax in spoken and written English. Another cause for the challenging linguistics is that some children are exposed to a language other than English at home and have limited experience or exposure to acquiring the second language. Others may be exposed to L1 and L2 at home and use the 2 languages without clear preference, causing confusion with appropriate language usage. Additional causes. As stated in the list of challenging linguistic features, Spanish-speaking students struggle with English pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, spelling, and punctuation due to the confusing linguistic differences between the language. Spanish speakers learning English regularly have problems with pronunciation because of the differences between the 2 languages' sound system. English has 12 vowels and 8 diphthongs, while Spanish has only 5 of each. Spanish rhythm gives syllables equal length, while English gives more time to accented syllables. The even rhythm in English of some Spanish speakers can make them tough to understand. When it comes to vocabulary, the cause for confusion revolves around the many false cognates that confuse the Spanish student of English. These pairs sound alike, but have very different meanings. English grammar is also particularly confusing to Spanish speakers because Spanish has more verbs, endings, than English, and a complete sentence in Spanish does not always need a subject. Because of this, Spanish speakers often omit subject pronouns from their English sentences. The speakers tend to copy Spanish word order, departing from the essential subject-verb order of English structure. Those who speak Spanish also have trouble with English spelling because they come from a more phonetic system. The different ways to spell the same sound in English can cause problems, as in words like rough and fluff. The large number of vowel sounds and diphthongs are also difficult. Native Spanish speakers often simplify English groups of 2 or 3 consonants and are jumbled by when to spell double or single letters. They sometimes put exclamation points or question marks at both the beginning and ending of sentences when they write. In addition to this, with their grammar, they frequently use commas to connect independent clauses, resulting in comma splices. All of these are causes for linguistic challenges Spanish-speaking elementary students face when they are acquiring English. Literature research question is, how do we overcome this? Teaching English as a second language involves no single or simplistic methodology. Teaching English as a second language criteria must include consideration of teaching spoken English, English structure, English vocabulary, English writing, and English reading and literature. Teachers in ELL programs are not just second language teachers, nor are they only literacy teachers. They are required to develop the full range of language skills, reading, writing, and content area knowledge with language minority students. To accomplish this, the teacher must apply theories and principles from psycholinguistics related to second language acquisition, along with effective literacy practices. Studies of second language acquisition development and cross-linguistic transfer of skills indicate that there is a high level of transfer skills and strategies from the first to the second language. Teachers need a level of specialized knowledge of second language acquisition development to maximize the effectiveness of literacy instruction for second language learners. Teaching programs need to utilize the techniques of contrastive analysis to identify the essential phonological and grammatical differences between the 2 languages involved. Developing English and Spanish-speaking children requires understanding, flexible, creative, and bilingual friendly teachers. To be effective in teaching English as a second language to L1 Spanish-speaking students, teachers must have a knowledge and understanding of the following: the relationship between oral language proficiency and the development of skills, and the progression of learning the competent skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The contrasts and congruent points between the first and second languages, and methods of contrastive linguistic analysis between the first language and English. The difficulty level of the learning materials based on unfamiliar or culturally different vocabulary, syntactic complexity, and text structure and purpose of the reading tasks. Methods of assessing students' levels, students' learning styles, and related reading styles and interests for selecting appropriate instructional strategies that are congruent with cultural learning orientations, as well as idiosyncratic preferences. Literacy patterns of the students' families and culture, including how reading, speaking, and writing are taught in the student's native language, and rhetorical patterns commonly used in written text in the native language. A variety of methods and approaches for teaching decoding and comprehension, including principles from phonics skills and whole group language approaches. And finally, criteria for selecting appropriate materials based the redundancy of linguistic forms, conceptual complexity, and cultural relevance to the learners. In terms of overcoming the nurturing L1 Spanish language learners' writing development in English is concerned, teachers should look at each child as an individual because all writers are unique and their writing development will reflect those idiosyncratic qualities. Get to know the children with whom you work, their interests, and their writing processes. Encourage children to write and draw their stories right from the beginning, before they have mastered oral English. Create opportunities for children to share writing with adults in the classroom and among their peers, young writers themselves. Allow children the time and space they need to test out their hypotheses about written language. Use each child's first language often and adds in as many different ways as possible while completing classroom activities. And finally, surround children with print in a range of languages and alphabetic and logographic systems. Additional research findings that I conducted after completing the literature research to help me with my own understanding. I discovered that a fundamental principle in the use of the primary language for initiating acquisition in bilingual education is the linguistic interdependence of language acquisition and the transfer of literacy skills from the primary language into the second language of the bilingual learner. I found that teachers' belief in the positive role of the primary language in development of cognitive academic skills and the value of primary language instruction in building the cultural identity and self-esteem of bilingual students is extremely useful to the effective implementation of transitional ELL education programs. More research that I found from coming across different educational sites and foundations, I learned that the National Association for Bilingual Education reported a compendium of research findings concluding that when taught by teachers who understand and believe in the important role of primary language in literacy learning, ELL students showed higher levels of achievement in school. Teaching English as a second language involves no single or symptomatic methodology. Teaching English as a second language criteria must include consideration of teaching spoken English structure, English vocabulary, English writing, and English reading, and English literature. Developing English and Spanish-speaking children requires understanding flexible, creative, and bilingual-friendly teachers. Applications. Overall, this research paper has gone over a long list of linguistic features that can cause confusion for children trying to acquire a new language successfully. The paper reviewed these and other issues associated with specific linguistic features. The PowerPoint helped discuss tips and solutions for overcoming challenges. An application to take away from this is, in order to adequately help L1 Spanish-speaking students acquire English successfully, educators must be knowledgeable in best practices to help the English language learners achieve their language proficiency goals, whatever they may be. Languages like English and Spanish that are alphabetic share many similarities when it comes to acquiring a successful language. These similarities and differences can serve as a resource for instruction, but must be understood fully to ensure effective instructional practices. Similarities and differences across the key components of SLA include phonological awareness, phonics, morphology, vocabulary, and grammar, just to name a few, for the English language learners. Phonological awareness is a key component of the second language acquisition across Spanish and English. Phonological awareness skills include the ability to process and manipulate the sounds of language. If a student is able to process sounds in his or her native language, then it is possible to transfer these same skills to the second language. If a student is able to master phonological awareness skills in the first language, then he or she is more likely to master this ability in the second language. Another key component of SLA is the graphophonemic knowledge of phonics. For English language learners, phonics instruction can address the concepts of English that are not present in the native language. English language learners can transfer their phonics knowledge from one language to the second language. However, for the transfer to take place, the language must be similar in the structure, like in the Spanish and English alphabet. It is important for educators to remember that English language learners require explicit and systematic English phonics instruction. Teachers may want to consider the similarities across languages such as Spanish and English when teaching language skills. As far as concluding thoughts are concerned, I would like to say that in summary, English language learners can benefit from learning which components of phonics knowledge transfer and what is similar or dissimilar between the English and Spanish language. Educators must not assume that the transfer is automatic. It should be explicitly taught. Reference page 1, reference page 2. That concludes this presentation.